And thank you, Administrator. I want to just take issue with, this could be my last 5 minutes on this committee, so I'm going to take all four
Congress calls FEMA Director.
My colleague, Trustee Al, with all due respect, offered what is by far the easiest and most disingenuous argument. You administer the one department in domestic policy that has to triage and set priorities, your department. And in case of a declared emergency, either as it affords itself under the Stafford Act or by some extension by the President or your own determination, you are empowered and your department is empowered to decide what of the programs you're running today should take precedent or priority over the others. Yes, sure, we can pass a law that limits the shelter and services funding, that stops dollars to getting to illegal immigrants, but you have to make that decision every day. It's the only department in the federal government that empowers you to do so. My colleague, Mr. Graves, said somewhat earlier that you have to agree that it is absurd for Americans in the South, having now faced what is by far among the worst emergencies to befall our country, that they see those who are placed here, illegal immigrants placed here by their federal government. They see the not-for-profits you engage with handing out ease of access dollars while they have to struggle to get first to 750. I administered emergency response for 20 years at the county level. Believe me, there's a lot of improvements and coordination that FEMA must engage in. But do you see the absurdity? Because I haven't heard an answer that suggests it. Do you see the absurdity that American citizens are getting their 750 and then, yes, struggling through a very complicated process to meet the thresholds necessary to get the aid they need to have housing, food, and shelter, while your agency is contracting with not-for-profits to easily hand out access to those who are placed here illegally? Do you see the absurdity?
Congressman, our mission is to support people, help people before, during, and after disasters. And
do you think that there is, ma'am, do you think in responding to an emergency, the priority of government ought to be to ensure that American citizens are triaged and that the services of FEMA are focused on responding to them and their service programs first?
Yes.
I absolutely believe that the services that FEMA provides should be supporting the people that have been impacted by disasters.
Should there be equity in that distribution and response? Should there be fairness in that response?
We should make sure that all people have access to our programs and that we
remove the barriers. So this is my time and I get 4 minutes to 2 minutes to do it. So in fairness, do you not see the inequity in those placed here illegally having taxpayers support a plane ticket, a house, a hotel, food, cell phones, access to health care? Do you not see the inequity that they have access immediately? I want us to be a welcoming nation, but if we cannot respond to those who are living in emergencies, then we do not have the right to claim that we are the Federal Emergency Management Administration. Do you not see the inequity?
Congress directed.
No, Congress established law. You have to prioritize, triage, and decide. During COVID, there were federal agencies and local governments who were responsible for providing lots of services. We said, in this emergency, you're not going to do that. We told federal employees, get back out onto the ground because you've got to respond to a public health pandemic, and most of them were never involved in public health response. You established the priority. Why can you not say today that the priority ought to have been to make sure that American citizens were getting first response, adequate response, and not distracted response? Why can you not say that?
Our priority is the American people, and we administered our disaster programs.
And you will not admit to or acknowledge the inequities. I'm not trying to be combative. This is absurd. Today, when you spent some time and my colleagues talk about misinformation first, misinformation is freedom of speech, whether it's true or not.
Illegal immigrants, anybody.
But you know what fuels misinformation? The inequity that FEMA has engaged in. Because it allows for people to assume, whether true or not, a level of either incompetence, inefficiency, or lack of concern for those who are struggling the most when they see individuals enter this country illegally and then are transported here and receiving services. And you know that it is easier to access the shelter and services funding than it is to access disaster relief aid, housing assistance, small business aid. You know that it's more complicated. Doesn't that in and of itself fuel the misinformation?
Congressman, we are administering that program as directed by Congress.
You are not administering the program as directed by Congress. We establish the law, we establish the provisions, and we expect the person, whether it's the president or the administrator of FEMA, to decide what is and is not priority in response to emergency. And by that very measure, with all due respect, the agency has failed. And it has lost focus. My time is up. I yield back to the chairman.
Say where the money go, then she can't fail.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Representative Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. A few things, we have a lot of fires,
I want
ice
to know
storms,
if
floods
they were skipping over the
that have
people's houses with
gotten
Trump
more
signs.
and more
That's all I wanna
severe.
know.
This year, we've had 1.9 million acres of land that was burnt with fires, and that is over twice the 10-year average. But as things are getting hotter and drier and climate is getting more extreme, some of my colleagues want to argue about why, but what I want to say is the fact of the matter is FEMA is set up for when natural disasters happen every once in a while, maybe every 6 months. And so you have a lot of temporary Stafford Act employees. Is it true that 4/5 of your employees are in that temporary Stafford Act category?
Ma'am, can you repeat the number that you said?
4/5. My understanding is 20,000 out of your 25,000 employees are in that. Is that
I
inaccurate?
believe that would be high. I believe about half of our workforce, maybe a little bit more than half, are direct employees out of the Disaster Relief Fund and support disasters directly. The rest support our steady state missions.
Okay, so half of your employees, and the fact is this has become a full-time job. I represent a lot of rural communities. I've never seen a difference between how FEMA treats my rural conservative areas and my more blue areas. And it seems like you had an employee that acted inappropriately, unethically, in an untrustworthy manner, and then lied about who apparently, according to the facts that we know so far, lied about who was responsible for that, right?
We had a single employee that took actions that were unacceptable by directing her team to avoid homes.
She said that was, she was on Roland Martin saying that's what they told her to do.
I just think that if you have an employee that acts in an unethical manner, it follows that maybe they're not telling the truth. But again, I've never seen any difference. And I'm going to go on to a different subject because I do represent Oregon. We had 23 fires in mid-July at the same time, earlier than we'd ever had fires, 23 incident command centers, just following a massive ice storm. We had floods. We have, our rangeland, our ranchers, our farms that were burnt. Now, we have a mix of federal and state and private land, and our governor has asked for President Biden to approve a major disaster declaration for wildfire and storm damage between July 10th and September 7th. Our requests include public assistance for our 6 frontier counties, Gillum, Grant, Jefferson, Umatilla, Wasco, and Wheeler, hazard mitigation grant programs to support projects that reduce the impact of future disasters, and a state cost-sharing waiver, waiving the state's cost for emergency work in response to this disaster. This has been the most expensive fire season ever, and what it seems like is FEMA is looking at each of these fires individually when really what we would like to see is for all of these to be taken together because
fires on the east and west
we
coast
had to manage it. So when can this, and if you have to get back to me, I understand because this isn't a committee hearing on this, but when can the state reasonably expect a response to the disaster declaration request? We have our farmers and ranchers that are really, really struggling, have lost everything, and they really need this help.
Congresswoman, we did receive that request from the governor, I believe, on October 21st. And I recognize and know how important this is to you. I will certainly go back and follow up with my team to see where it's at in the process, and we'll get back with your staff.
Okay, and then the disaster declaration process often feels slow to affected communities, and we've had this again. Blue and red districts, and I do think that your agency has a giant job and doesn't necessarily always have the resources to do it. How can FEMA streamline the steps between the agency receiving a disaster declaration request and submitting a recommendation to the president?
You know, the biggest thing that we see is really at the capacity of the state and local level and whether or not they have the resources to be able to quickly and effectively determine the amount of damage and submit that paperwork. We've been increasing our support by putting what we call FEMA integration team members and embedding staff right with state offices so they can assist with that process. We have 10 regions and a regional administrator over each of them that have great relationships with the state directors and work very closely with them to help them understand what the steps are, where they need to go, and to work through and provide technical assistance as needed.
We're over time. What I will say is these are cash-strapped rural counties that lost a lot of their economic engine when the timber industry crashed. And so they're doing the best they can, but what I would say is we really need to figure out how to get these answers quicker, and thank you for your response.
Happy to work with you on that.
Yep.
Gentlelady yields. Chair now recognizes Representative Stauber.
Thank you very much, Administrator. Thanks for being here today. And also thanks for your service in the Colorado National Guard. I appreciate that. I also appreciate your willingness to tell us, and you've been in several committee hearings, to talk about how you let that employee go who weaponized the federal government. The federal government has been weaponized against the American people. This is case in point. I think you did your job, and I think you did it well. You terminated that employee who weaponized the federal government as quickly as you can. And I think we need to do more of that. With that being said, your mission statement is helping people before, during, and after disasters. When you were in the Colorado National Guard, did you have annual reviews?
Did I have a what?
Annual reviews?
I was a traditional Guard member. I wouldn't have had it.
Well, you'd still have annual reviews, okay? Outstanding, meets standards, and does not meet standards. Would that be fair enough?
As I recall.
Okay. So, if you were in the Colorado National Guard and you were in charge of disasters in Colorado, and the tag said you're responsible, and there was a major disaster that the National Guard had to be brought out in Colorado, and it took 3 days for you to deploy, and 5 days to even get into some neighborhoods, would the tag say that's acceptable for you as the leader of the management team? Emergency management team?
Congressman, FEMA was on the ground before the disaster happened.
So we had 2 members of Congress that represent 778,000 people stood here or sat here just within the hour and said there were people that didn't even get responded to
Calling them lies.
for 3 days and some in a week. So that contradicts what you just said, okay? I'm asking you, if you were in Colorado, what would the tag do to you if you didn't respond for 3 days to the citizens of Colorado in a disaster?
Well, Congressman.
What would he be upset with you, or would she or he be upset with you?
Congressman, our teams were on the ground before the disaster happened.
Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not asking that question. I'm not asking that question. I asked you, would the tag be disappointed in you if it took you 3 days to help the citizens of Colorado or some neighborhood?
I think the Adjutant General of Colorado would be impressed with the way FEMA responded to this disaster.
I like her answer.
I'm trying to help you here. I understand you have a tough job. I want you to be able to tell the American people that we could have done better. And as a traditional guardsman, I totally respect your service.
Man, we could always do better most
And
of
I expect honesty.
in hindsight.
And you should expect honesty for my questioning. I asked you, would the tag be upset with you if you didn't send your people into a disaster in Colorado for 3 days, and sometimes some neighborhoods didn't get it for 5. Would the tag be upset with you?
Well, that information is inaccurate, and I would hope he would look for accurate information.
Ooh.
Ma'am, how would you score yourself in this response to Helene?
I think that there
Would
is
you
always
would you
room
score
for
yourself outstanding? Would you score yourself outstanding? Meets standards or does not meet standards?
I am incredibly proud of the work that the 22,000 members of this workforce have done to support the American people
So
across 6 states impacted by one of the most
Administrator.
catastrophic events in recent years.
Administrator, we had 2 members of Congress that would challenge you on that statement.
Okay.
The American citizens needed you at the time. They needed you, and they're still needing you for 3 days. I mean, we had a major disaster in Minnesota. We had a governor for 3 days that watched Minneapolis burn. That's unacceptable, simply unacceptable. And I would just hope that, as we go forward, I don't want to politicize this. I mean, there's enough. But your response, you're the leader, the buck stops with you. From the testimony I heard here from the representatives of the people, it was disappointing. Do you think you could have done better?
I encourage you, Congressman, to read my written testimony, which describes in detail how we were on the ground before the disaster happened. And I respect the testimony of the 2 panel members earlier.
Do you think you could have done better?
We can always improve, and we will review all
Is that a
our
yes?
response efforts.
Is that a yes?
Nobody is perfect, Congressman. We can always improve, and we strive to always improve on the
Do you
way
think
to
you could have done
deliver.
better, though? Yes?
We can always do better.
Okay. Listen, I want to thank you for your service. It's not easy, but when we come and ask you questions, we just expect, this is a dialogue. You represent
Can't
us,
just
the
expect
people.
a
And if it
yes and
happens
no
in
answer.
Minnesota, I
You
would
can't.
expect you to be there as quickly as I can. And I would say that from the statements of the 2 representatives, both a Democrat and Republican, you could have done much better in the response, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from South Dakota, Representative Johnson, is recognized.
So under the heading of ways that we can all improve, I want to look at ways in that the current legislative regime, I don't think provides enough flexibility to states. I'll tell you what I mean. So now when a president declares a federal disaster, in those affected areas, governors can have the flexibility to increase the weight limits on interstates. Makes sense, makes the delivery of recovery and disaster supplies a lot more efficient. I think we've heard 2 things from you today, Administrator, with your colloquies with some of my colleagues. Number 1, as you said to Mr. Ezell, recovery is complicated and it can take a long time. We all know that's true. And number 2, disaster supplies can get pulled in from a large geographic area. So here I think are the weaknesses in the current legislative regime, and you'll tell me where my assumptions are wrong. So first off, recovery can take a long time. Right now, when the president issues this disaster declaration, I think governors are only given the flexibility to increase those weight limits for 120 days. Clearly, recovery can take a lot longer than that. Number 2, disaster supplies get pulled from a large geographic area. If you're a governor in a state where the disaster supplies originate, so you're not in the area that's been impacted directly by the disaster, but you've got supplies that can help those folks a couple of states away, you don't have the flexibility to increase the weight limits on the interstates within your state. So the MOVE Act, which is a bipartisan effort in this committee, Mr. Costa and myself, would provide flexibility in both those areas by moving the amount of time that governors can have that flexibility from 120 days to 270 days. And then, again, large impacted area allows governors to waive those weight limits if they're in an area where the supplies originate. So, Madam Administrator, the MOVE Act, does that sound like that would increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of disaster response?
Congressman, I know that as I've worked many disasters across the United States, we are often reaching out to the Department of Transportation to help waive some of the limitations to move supplies across. And so I think anything that makes it easier to move resources in support of immediate response efforts would be welcomed.
Anything else you can think of in the transportation, logistics, supply chain space that would make it easier for us to get supplies to the people who need them?
Congressman, I think the biggest thing that we have and the biggest resource we have is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which allows governors to request resources from other states, which then, if a federal disaster declaration is declared, those costs are all reimbursed through the disaster declaration. Those types of resources and tools to be able to share resources across states are the things that actually make a big difference in the speed and the delivery of governors being able to support their communities that were
I don't know if I like her.
Yeah, I do think those aspects,
I like
as
her
well as
answers, though.
passage of the MOVE Act, would help with recovery efforts. We talked a little bit about this terrible employee, this crew leader that you had, ma'am. Obviously, you weathered a lot of questions about that. I think you've been upfront that this was a bad employee who was terminated from her job. Is there a culture problem within FEMA? I mean, is this a one-off, or are there other employees who would, as Mr. Stauber said, would be interested in weaponizing government against citizens?
The actions of this employee are unacceptable, and it is not indicative of the culture of FEMA, and I do not believe that there is a widespread cultural problem. I have directed ongoing investigations, working with the IG, working with the Office of the Special Counsel, and if we find any other acts of similar behavior, we will take appropriate disciplinary measures.
So what should Congress, what should this committee look for? I mean, we want to take you at your word. We want to believe that we don't have a culture problem within FEMA. What should we be looking for over the course of the next 3 months to validate your assertions?
I think that you should look at the results that we come out with from ongoing investigations and the amount of assistance that we continue to provide in communities and the support during their recovery process. We will be with them throughout their recovery, helping them rebuild in a way that's going to make them more resilient against future disasters.
Would an investigation from an inspector general or an ombudsman or some other third party help increase the confidence of this committee that your assertions are accurate?
We are currently in conversations with the IG, and I would welcome an inspection from the IG. And as I stated to Chairman Perry earlier, I will personally request that investigation from the IG.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Representative Webster from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is on behalf of Lake County, one of the 4 counties I represent in Florida. It's critical for communities to know what is and what is not eligible for FEMA reimbursement. So they can plan accordingly for a natural disaster. Counties may have in place sort of a debris removal contract in advance of the disaster, so the debris removal can move quickly and follow up from the storm. However,
RFK Jr.
depending on the circumstances, actual costs may exceed the contract. Unfortunately, my office has not been able to get a clear answer from FEMA on whether or not the increase is reimbursable. And I just asked the administrator, are those costs reimbursable, or are the communities only reimbursed at the amount that they had in a pre-existing contract?
Congressman, I would need to understand the specifics of what they're asking for, and I'm happy to follow up with you and your team on that case to see what's eligible and not eligible.
I think that what they're asking is, okay, there's this contract, they have it, and they perform that, although the contract was exceeded. And so by exceeding it, they only get what they had a contract for reimbursed, or can the excess also be reimbursed?
Okay, I get what you're asking.
On the basis of what you're saying, that doesn't sound like a reasonable approach from FEMA. We would be reimbursing all eligible costs. And if they had to incur additional costs beyond their contract, that should, from what you're saying, fall under the eligible circumstances. But I would, again, have to see that specific case.
Thank you very much. Go back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York,
They were laughing at
Representative D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Administrator. How are you? First, I want to start off with, I'm sure as you've heard time and time again from colleagues, on this committee, it's absolutely reprehensible to withhold aid and support based on political
Made
affiliation.
a penguin.
As you know, in addition to
show.
being on this committee, I serve as the subcommittee chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee's Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee that is also looking into this matter. Additionally, I was the chief of the Island Park Fire Department when Hurricane Sandy brought destruction and devastation to Long Island. And I will tell you that no political affiliation, no campaign sign, nothing would have prevented me and those who served under me from helping our neighbors. So I'm sure you can understand why reports of FEMA employees skipping homes based on political affiliation and support of President-elect Donald Trump is both shocking and absolutely disturbing. First off, what has FEMA done or planning to do to ensure the homes that were passed over because of President Trump's signs are made whole?
Good question.
Congressman, I appreciate your ongoing support of FEMA, and I share your concerns over the actions of this employee. We have first terminated that employee to ensure that we can continue to do the good work to support the American people. We have also sent in an additional team to go to those 20 homes that we have identified as having been skipped over to ensure that they have had an opportunity to register for assistance. And we've provided refresher training to all of our staff in the field to remind them about the importance of serving all people, meeting them where they are, and ensuring that anyone who has been impacted has an opportunity to apply for assistance.
Okay. So the employee at the center of this, who, as you said, was terminated, which I appreciate that, and I think that that was the correct course of action. But she claims that her instructions were part of a, quote, institutional FEMA policy of avoiding potentially hostile homes. So I think you briefly touched on it, but what are your plans to change or clarify this, what could be a very bogus policy, but nonetheless one that people in FEMA feel that exists, to make sure that it never happens again?
There is nowhere in any FEMA policy, any training material or information that would direct any of our staff to avoid a home because of a political sign in their yard. We do provide training to our staff about aggressive behavior and how they can make sure that they can feel safe. And as we have conducted this refresher training, we have reminded them that this is reactive behavior when somebody is approaching you, not proactive to discriminate against somebody.
Okay, thank you.
And
now I'm going to bring it a little closer to home. So earlier this year on Long Island, there was a 1 in 1,000 year rain event, which produced nearly 10 inches of rain, leading to widespread flash flooding that caused road closures, travel disruptions, and significant damage to public and private property. Following the rain event, the New York State applied for both public and individual assistance from FEMA. The state was successful in receiving a declaration for public assistance. However, individual assistance was just denied last week. And I know that this is an issue both my colleagues from Long Island, Mr. Lalotta and Mr. Garbarino, are working on. But FEMA's public assistance program has defined the threshold of $37.5 million in damages for eligibility to New York State. However, according to the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services in New York State, determining eligibility for individual assistance is more complex and cannot be assessed as straightforwardly as the public assistance threshold. So first, is there a comparable threshold or specific dollar amount for uninsured damages that must be met for a disaster to qualify for individual assistance?
Our individual assistance program does not use a very clear-cut guideline like that because we understand that the community impact could also be a consideration. And if a community has had such significant trauma to it, we wouldn't want an arbitrary line, an arbitrary number to prevent them from getting assistance. So we have flexibility within our authorities to understand the impact of a community, but also what the availability and the capacity is of the state or the local jurisdiction to support them.
So we're going to be talking about this in the Homeland Subcommittee, but if you wouldn't mind, if you could have you and your staff, if you would be willing to provide more detailed information on how those thresholds for individual assistance are determined. I understand that it's sort of a cloudy area, but that would be able to help us on Long Island assist our neighbors and give them concrete answers as to what they're dealing with. I know that, again, Mr. Lalotta and Mr. Garbarino are both dealing with a lot of phone calls, a lot of concerns, people that really don't know where to turn to next. And as we know, these storms were devastating, unexpected, which sometimes makes them even more devastating. And we just want to give them answers. So if you could provide a little bit further detailed information, we'd all appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman, thanks. The gentleman, the chair now recognizes Representative Yakum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Administrator Criswell. The hardworking men and women at FEMA have an important role to play in our communities, helping lift up their fellow Americans when they've been knocked down by a disaster. But recent months have exposed a capabilities gap and a trust gap. And that trust gap is no act of God. And I want to better understand this recent scandal in which houses in Florida were skipped by FEMA canvassers because of Trump signs in their front yard. You've referenced an investigation that is currently underway. There have been concerns expressed that FEMA is deleting emails related to the employee's assertion that it was a directive from her supervisors to skip homes displaying signs supporting President Trump. Ms. Criswell, can you commit to us today that all FEMA records, including Teams messages, emails, and text messages, have been and will be preserved for this investigation?
Congressman, all of our records are preserved, and I can commit to you that any requests that you make, we will make sure to send them to you.
Thank you. You've been fairly consistent and insistent that this was one employee who acted alone, but are you able to guarantee that no one at FEMA headquarters gave verbal or written guidance in the wake of Hurricanes Helene and Milton that recommended skipping or that otherwise warned canvases about interacting with houses with Trump signs in their lawn?
We are continuing to investigate the circumstances surrounding this, but I have been presented with no evidence at this point that there was anything beyond this one person's direction.
And what steps will you take? Because it sounds like you cannot at this point guarantee that that is not taking place. What steps are you taking at FEMA headquarters to ensure and guarantee us that no guidance was given from headquarters to skip over houses that were canvassed, skip over houses that have Trump signs in the front yard?
Again, we want to make sure that all people impacted by these disasters have the assistance that they're eligible for and that they deserve. We are continuing to conduct an investigation. Our Office of Professional Responsibility is currently working alongside the Office of the Inspector General, and we expect them to fully investigate the circumstances around this to ensure that this was only a single incident.
And the employee at the center of the scandal hinted that a policy to skip houses with Trump signs may have also been in place in North Carolina as well. Are you able to guarantee that there was not a similar policy in North Carolina?
Again, I have seen no evidence that shows that this was anything beyond this one person's specific instructions to her team.
The number one goal under FEMA's strategic plan for 2022 through 2026 is what? What is the number one goal under your strategic plan?
Equity as a foundation of emergency management.
And for reference, what was the number one goal under the 2018 through 2022 strategic plan?
I do not know that was before.
To build a culture of preparedness. Does skipping houses with Trump signs advance equity, which is your number one strategic plan goal?
Equity, as we look at it, is to make sure that we are reducing barriers for anybody that has a need to access our programs. And so we are ensuring that we are taking down barriers so all people impacted by disasters have access to the programs that they need and that they are eligible for.
And equity, according to FEMA's own guidance, which, in the executive order signed by President Biden, executive order number 13985 defines equity as, quote, the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. Do you believe that the individuals with Trump signs in their front yard were treated fairly and impartially?
They were not, which is why we terminated her.
Thank you. And I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the chairman, Mr. Perry.
Oh, well, the chair thanks the gentleman. Administrator, you're in support of the supplemental request. You're in support of that, right? And you would kind of agree with the assertion that you don't have the staffing necessary to complete your mission in one form or another.
That I don't have the staffing?
You don't have personnel.
I have the staffing and personnel to complete our mission.
You do.
I need funding to continue to support reimbursing.
You need the funding. Okay. So let me ask you this. You figure out your strategic plan, and it seems to me that your strategic plan bumped your core mission of helping people before, during, and after disasters. Can you explain? I mean, you sent, I think, is it 2 people to Azerbaijan? I don't know how far Azerbaijan is, but your organization sent, as I understand, is it more than 2 people or just 2 people to the, as it's stated, the Solidarity for a Green World Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP probably 24 or 25 or whatever the heck it is. 2 people? How many?
COP 29, I believe we sent 2 people.
2 people. What, who approves that?
I do.
You approve that. So can you provide the committee the details on how much that cost, how much their stay was, and how that, look, people here talk about disinformation. One of the biggest portions of disinformation that I consistently see is that disasters are more frequent. They're more devastating. Simply, the data doesn't support any of that, and it's all, and allegedly that's all caused by us. And no data supports that either, yet that's made. Those assertions are made, and one of those assertions is, of course, about climate change itself. And of course, you're sending your staff, which apparently you have enough of, but you don't have enough money, but you're paying. So we'd like to know how much all that costs to send them to Azerbaijan. With that, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Representative Van Drew.
Chairman, thank you. Administrator, you seem like a really nice person, and you have a very nice personality, and you seem calm and gentle. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm angry and I'm tired of it. I don't only sit on transportation. I sit on judiciary. And, you know, I've been at hearings for hours where we were told that there wasn't any plan to go into Roman Catholic churches. And I'm digressing, I realize that. And yet we found out there was, and they had to apologize. We were told that nobody was going to school board meetings because people were reflecting their individual opinions. And again, over time, we dug in and found out there was. There is a culture in America that this issue represents and symbolizes. Now, I'm a plain speaker, I'm a plain talker, and I'm very direct. So I'm going to ask you some things. I know you've talked about it, but the reason we keep going back to it, Administrator, it's a really big deal. It's the First Amendment that people have the right to express their viewpoint, their feelings, who they want to vote for, what they believe, whether they're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, Trump or Harris, who cares? Because guess what? The folks on the other side of the aisle should know if it happened to us, it could happen to them. That's the reality. And I believe that FEMA's blatantly neglected its core mission of providing emergency support to all Americans without prejudice or bias. And I also believe this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I understand the person who's been fired, she swears that this came from above her. So the first question I'm going to ask you, that this was part of the administration. Is she a liar?
Her allegations, I have not seen any evidence that this is beyond her specific direction, but we are conducting additional investigations to ensure that this is an isolated incident.
So the truth
and that
is
we will take disciplinary action if there was more than her direction.
The truth is we don't know yet. It's the culture. It's the culture of what's going on. And you know, part of what they said, this individual, they called Trump supporters, and I know I know your answer is going to be, no to this, as, quote, vicious dogs, end quote. I want to just say how deep and mean this was.
It was very mean.
Do you believe that Trump supporters are vicious dogs?
That was a comment that was not made by me, and I do not believe in that comment, no.
Okay, I'm sure you don't.
She took too
Do
long.
political affiliations with the Republican Party make someone inherently dangerous because they happen to be a Republican? Yes or no?
That is not in alignment with our core mission and our values of integrity, compassion, fairness, and respect.
And I agree, and I understand that, but think about this. People, when they are their most vulnerable, most in need, most scared, most worried, in the most trouble, probably in their entire lives, hardworking men and women of America, looking to a federal agency to protect them, to help them, to take care of them, and they got literally a knife in the heart. I mean, that's what this really represented. Those people, how do they feel? They break their back paying the taxes that keep us all going here. So when we finally are supposed to do a job, this is what happens. How heartbreaking is that?
Congressman, this was unacceptable, and it is heartbreaking.
I know.
I have pushed for 3.5 years to put people first.
And you know what?
Everything that we do.
And that's what kind of, and again, forgive me, I'm going to editorialize for a minute. We speak of equity, which is different than equality, and it's become a political symbol to some degree, whether folks want to admit it or not. We're worried about pronouns. We're worried about illegals. We're worried about everything, and I get it. But how about just worrying about the average man and woman who's working, who lives in America, who's
Paycheck to
legal, who
paycheck.
pays their taxes, who obeys the laws, and finally needs help? Because most of these people never need help. They don't want anything. They get their Social Security when they retire, and that's about it. Just think how they feel. And I'm concerned. And I have to tell you, I have personally asked Joe Kufari, who is the Inspector General in Homeland Security, personally asked him, sent him a letter. He's a good man. He's an honest broker to look into this and really dissect this and see what's going on. I think we're going to find it's more than one person. That culture allowed this one person to think
feel
it was
comfortable,
okay.
yeah.
That culture that we've had, whether it's in the Department of Justice, or whether it is here in
And she
Homeland
still
Security,
told her
other
people
areas, that
to do
culture
it,
has
and they felt
allowed
comfortable
this
doing it, listening to her.
take place. That culture is wrong, and it denies the most fundamental values of Americanism.
And those
You
people
know,
who listen
somebody
to her
said to me humorously,
and her
hey,
team,
and this wasn't humorous, President Trump had a really good result in the state of New Jersey. He didn't quite make it, but it's usually a very, very blue state. The state I'm from is New Jersey, because we're having wildfires right now, as you probably know. And people wonder, are we going to be punished because it was so supportive of President Trump? I would hope not. Because to be honest with you, I do my job. I was a dentist in my other life, and your job is kind of like that. We have to
His
take
other life,
care
I
of
like how you
people,
said that.
not in the political end, but in the governmental end, regardless of who they are, what they believe, what they feel, what they've said. That is our responsibility and job. This is so unbelievably, fundamentally wrong. And I'm not showboating here as a politician. I swear to God, this really bothers me. It really bothers Americans. It's a grievous mistake. It's awful that it happened, and it has to be fixed. I wanted to see if there's any other questions. Hold on for a second.
The gentleman's time.
Oh, my time is up. Well, there is no more questions, right, Chairman? Chairman, thank you for making me aware of that. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. He might seek time from the
Somebody
next
else?
representative if he has any left. The next representative, Representative Bean from Florida, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very good morning to you. Good morning, T&I Committee, and good morning, Administrator. Welcome. Let's cut through the disinformation that's been talked about. So let's play a game called True or False. I'll say a statement, you say true or false, Madam Administrator.
Let's see.
After Helene, it was widely reported that a FEMA supervisor told aid workers to avoid homes advertising Trump. Is that true or false?
True.
A single employee directed her team to not go to homes.
I'm going to
Trump
put you
signs.
down for a true then. Is that correct?
A
True.
single employee.
I'm putting you down for a true. FEMA, here's the next one. FEMA is supposed to be nonpartisan. FEMA is supposed to be like the police or fire department. When they come, they're going to deliver aid. They don't care about your race, political affiliations or anything. They're supposed to just get the job done. Is that true or false, Madam Administrator?
True. FEMA is a nonpartisan agency.
Another true, putting you down for a true. According to a committee and an email to committee staff, that person responsible was fired from FEMA. Is that true or false, Madam Administrator?
That individual was terminated at my direction.
I'm going to put you down as a true. How do you know, though, it's only one person? How do we know?
This is why I have ongoing investigations, and we will be working with the IG to establish that it was just a single incident.
You are working with AG. That is fantastic. The Daily Wire has obtained screenshots of multiple entries in the system that said Trump signed no contract per leadership. So that's could be evidence, at least it's a trail to begin your investigation. Would you say that's true? That's a good lead. Is that a good lead?
Those were the staff that the individual in question directed not to go to Trump signs, Trump homes.
I'm going to put you down for another true. So here is the question. Do you understand why Americans lack confidence in FEMA leadership? You understand that.
Trust is the most important thing that we can have in government.
Again,
and
you
to
would
have
say
one
yes.
individual.
Can I put you down as a yes that you do understand why so many people are upset.
It is unacceptable why this one person made this direction, and
gonna
I
put you
can
down for a
understand
yes.
why they are upset.
Yes is so much easier to say. Yes, I understand it. You understand why people are mad. I'm not trying, it's not a
No, I
gotcha
said
question.
that. I
I'm just
said
saying
yes.
you
I
understand.
understand why the actions of this one individual can be so hurtful.
Very good. And I'm going to congratulate you on saying we might need some help from the Inspector General, because Americans just need trust in their fire department, their police department, and in FEMA. So what is the plan to restore Americans' trust in FEMA? What's the plan?
We are going to continue with our absolutely committed 22,000 plus employees to assist in the recovery efforts across these disasters and the over 100 other open disasters across the United States, helping them rebuild and restore their lives to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Thank you, Administrator. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not yet been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to, and I'm going to thank each of the witnesses. Administrator, it's been tough, but we do appreciate you being here. I know it's not always fun or pleasant, but we're very appreciative that you took the time to come and hear our questions and provide your answers. So with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned.
To wrap that up, she gave good answers. Some things she could have answered yes or no, just to be like, yes, no, like, I got you. But she didn't. She wanted to say yes, but blah, blah, blah. No, but blah, blah, blah. I understand that, but I don't know. It could have played in her favor as a woman being questioned by these like men. She could have like, oh my God, they're pressuring her. She could have did that, but she didn't. And it doesn't seem like this came from leadership, right? Now, it might have been ones or twos that did this and was saying, hey, if they got a Trump sign, don't go to their house. They're all aggressive. But at the same time, I understand what they were saying. Like, she felt comfortable enough to send this. If she's an employee and she's on the ground and she has let's say she got a team of 5 or 10 people, she knows that she got supervisors and managers over her. So she felt comfortable enough to say, hey, my team's not going there. Like, there must have been some type of checking in, right? Like, hey, what you guys doing today? We're going to all the houses over here, but we're not stopping at the Trump houses. Oh, okay. Like, what was it? She felt comfortable. The culture of it, it's just unexplainable. Like, somebody else besides her needs to be fired. Who was her direct supervisor? Who was her direct liaison or whatever? That person needs to be fired for, at the bare minimum, neglecting his duties and not knowing and understanding. And also, I feel like those people, whoever was on her team that took that, like, if I was there and I was on her team and she was sending me out and I'm like, we're going out today. And she was like, okay, yeah, we got some reports yesterday. Yeah, you could skip over the Trump houses. I'm like, what? No. Like, this is not 1970, 1980s. We're in the era of quiet quitters now. Like, these people go from different companies to company. They be on LinkedIn with this company for 6 months, with this company for 6 months, with this. We can now speak out. Nobody's afraid of not getting a job anymore. We can all speak out. Right? That's why Kamala was in trouble when they acting like she can't speak out against Joe Biden or disagree with him. Like, oh, she's the vice president. What's she supposed to do? She could speak out. And if you get fired for speaking out, then you sue people and say, hey, I was wrongfully terminated just for speaking my mind, practicing the First Amendment. Like, it's just stupid. But I did like that they're doing an investigation. That lady went on Roland Martin and said, well, they knew about it. They told us to do this, blah, blah, blah. And they did this, and they told us like it was right. She actually thinks she's like right. She's in the right. That, hey, we did this. We spotted a pattern with people in the Trump and with Trump signs. No, you're supposed to go up to each door, and if you met with aggression, then you back up. And you go to the next one. If you met with aggression, you back up. And if they happen to all have Trump signs, you say, that's crazy. Then you go to the next one and the next one. Because I also heard that lady on Roland Martin say, well, sometimes we've had certain people with Biden people or whatever. So then that shows that you can't draw a pattern just from what they have outside. Like, oh, all these people got grass outside. The people that got grass instead of rocks are all racist. We're not going to their house. That's just ridiculous. Even her explanation on Roland Martin was ridiculous. But her whole point was, yeah, it's ridiculous, but other people she's trying to take the whole ship down with her. And I do believe that there's other people involved. I don't believe it went up to the top and the director of FEMA would do that, but I do believe that it was more than just her. And if it is, then this FEMA director, administrator, whatever you want to call her, needs to come out and make it loud and clear. She needs to make a spectacle of them. Put charges on them. Find something to get them for. I don't know what it is. Treason, some shit. But let me know what y'all think about it in the comments, man.